domestic violence issues becoming an integral part of an organization's conversations as well. So which is why, along with BCIC, we have put together this webinar. I have with me co-moderating this session the wonderful Nirmala Menon. Nirmala's name is not new to most of you. She is the founder and CEO of Interweave Consulting. She is a champion in the diversity and inclusion space. In fact, she's been part of the advisory team of the UN IFEM, and she's advised the United Nations in finalizing their women's development principles. So I'm inviting Nirmala to just set the context for this conversation, and then I'll go on to introduce all our other panelists. And in the interim, a few housekeeping rules requesting all attendees to please put yourself on mute, just so we have a seamless conversation and there are no interruptions. Second, that you will see a chat window where you can put in your questions. It's heartening to see that questions have already started coming in. Just type in your questions and we'll take them during the course of this conversation. Nimi, on to you.
Thank you, Veena. Thank you for that lovely introduction, and absolutely delighted to be with everyone. Good morning. This is a very important topic and something that we've really not spoken about. It's not been part of public discourse for a long while, and I think it's time to do that now. We have a number of really great panelists, and like Veena said, there is one new person who joined us as well. So we are going to get a lot of different perspectives, and I'm not going to spend too much time saying anything else, but go straight into setting the context for our conversation today. Domestic violence and abuse is something that is not new to India. But as is evident from all the reports that we are seeing during the pandemic, we also realize that it's something that is pervasive across the globe. And it's cutting across, age, social class, educational, and economic background. It's something that's quite prevalent. Can we all stay on mute? Rama Mohan, can we have you on mute?
Tension. Tension
Mr. Ram Mohan, can we have you on mute, please?
Domestic violence
Ramesh, can we have you on mute?
Participants to kindly move your audio.
Okay, it's really important that all attendees put yourself on mute.
All of us.
Very sorry about that.
Thank you very much. Yeah, okay, not a problem. Yeah, so like I was saying, this is a problem that's quite prevalent and pervasive across the globe. It has existed before the pandemic, and it will continue after the pandemic if we don't do something proactively about it. What the pandemic has really done for us is to kind of point out and remind us of the urgency in which we should address this issue. So, and I'm glad we're having this conversation. When we hear of the term domestic violence, like Veena said earlier, we do not associate it with workplaces right away. But if you look at global statistics, it's about 1 in 3 or 1 in 4 women, they say, are subject to violence at some point in their lives, obviously in their careers as well, which then means that we are all working with some of them, some of the victims of domestic violence. Now, domestic violence does not stay in the house. It definitely follows the woman wherever she goes. And the consequences are obviously felt in the workplaces in terms of lower productivity, maybe absenteeism, being disturbed with calls, etc. And it is time for us to take a look at it. Even otherwise, we need to be taking a look at it. But since we are talking to the corporate world here, we are going to bring the association a lot more clearly to this in this discussion that we are having today. Again, while women are primary victims of domestic violence, this does not spare men either. Men are also subjected to this, maybe not physically as much, but definitely in the psychological and emotional sense. And it is also that a lot of groups of vulnerable people in society, people with disabilities, people from the LGBT community, or even socially disadvantaged in a sense, like people that are widowed or unemployed, etc., fall into this category of vulnerable people. So this webinar is really about having a conversation about bringing all the stakeholders together, telling organizations that this is something that you need to do, and organizations can be very powerful vehicles of social change. And how do you need to get involved in this? You cannot look at it and and assume that it does not impact the workplace. It certainly does. And this webinar, like Veena had pointed out, is sort of like a starter kit for us, helping us to get started with a conversation that we've not had before. We'll talk about what is domestic violence, because it's not only physical abuse. In fact, there's a difference between urban abuse and rural abuse. And, it's a fascinating subject if you really go into this. But today we will stick to how this is going to impact us in the workplace and what is it that we as organizations need to do. All of us need to come together, industry bodies, corporate leaders, government officials, and community members. All of us together need to collaborate to sort of root this out and make sure that it's a safe place for women, both at work and at home. So with that very quick setting context, I will hand it back to Veena to kind of take us through the questions.
Thank you, Nimi. Before we proceed, I think it's super important that I quickly introduce our wonderful panelists. Thank you so much for agreeing to be part of this webinar. So we have Ms. Nisha James, who is the Deputy Commissioner of Police. She's an IPS officer based in Bangalore, and she's done some phenomenal work with respect to migrant workers over the last couple of weeks. Joining her is Anisha is having some technical glitch, and she'll be joining us very, very shortly. We also have someone from the government of Karnataka, which is Dr. Pushpa. So Dr. Pushpa is the Deputy Director, Women and Child Development Department. We have Rama Iyer, who is the managing partner, Ayana Legal. Rama and I have been in touch for several years now, and she's passionate about helping women entrepreneurs in startup companies. She is an advocate of inclusion as well, and she actively advises in the space of domestic violence, marital issues, and yes, she is recognized as a thought leader in this space. We have with us, and this conversation would be completely meaningless without having a clinical psychologist on board, and for that we have Dr. Lata Hemchand. She holds a PhD in student mental health from NIMHANS, and she helps with emotional and behavioral problems, mental retardation, attention disorder, street and working children, child mental health, and she is a subject matter expert when it comes to women and mental health. And we have Augustus, who is the co-chairman, Women Empowerment and Leadership Expert Committee, BCIC, and an HR leader at IBM India. He is I work with Augie over several years now, and he is certainly a subject matter expert and thought leader in people's strategy. He has led public policy initiatives in several spaces, including with respect to simplifying the labor ecosystem. He is one of those people who actually walk the talk when it comes to feminism, and it's wonderful to have him on board for this conversation. While we get started, and we're waiting for both the police person and the government representative, I'm going to start the conversation asking Rama a question. So Rama, what really is domestic violence? Is it the way we've known domestic violence is about somebody getting battered, somebody being physically violent, and also we've also seen it very commonly only in the marital space where the husband beats up the wife. That is how we've all grown up seeing and understanding domestic violence. But what really is the scope of domestic violence, legally speaking? Rama, you're on mute. We can't hear you. You're on mute. Can the others hear her?
No, we can't hear her.
No, we can't hear her.
Rama, you need to unmute the mic.
I think it is unmuted. There is some other problem.
Please go ahead, ma'am.
Rama, can you? Okay, while you Excellent. So we have Nisha on board as well. So Nisha is the Deputy Commissioner of Police of Bangalore. So Rama, while you set up your speaker system, just say hello whenever and we'll confirm that. I think I'll start with my question to Nisha. Nisha, the United Nations calls domestic violence a shadow pandemic. And there are so many reports that the number of cases have surged and spiked over the last few weeks. You are a law enforcement officer, and therefore, could you tell us, is the problem really real in this context, or was it always there? Are people taking note of it? So, is there something? Is there a necessity, an urgency to take note of this issue now?
Certainly. First of all, very good morning to everybody participating in the webinar. I want to state that this is a pervasive problem in Indian society in general, but this unique situation of the pandemic, the lockdown that has been imposed on society, has created further complications in this already quite complicated situation. So one finds that it is like a double whammy, I would like to say, because the situation of being, confined to a limited space of the house, the perpetrator and the victim are in a sense in an inescapable situation. The perpetrator is also under a greater level of stress. That may be from being in a confined space, that may be from being cut off from friends and family, that may be from job insecurity and financial issues. So all of this adds to greater aggression on the part of the perpetrator on the one hand, and on the other hand, we have the victim or survivor, as we like to say, who is trapped in the situation. In the normal circumstances, that victim would have a certain level of relief in the day. Because usually the sort of situation would arise in the night, and the next day probably the perpetrator would go outside or something else. In that sense, there would be a period of relief for the victim for the entire day, and not just relief, it may also be an opportunity for the victim to escape that situation, but that no longer is a viable option to the victim or survivors, because they are trapped in that situation. They cannot leave the house, they are not in touch with their friends and family, for whom they would turn to for support in such a situation. So it is a double whammy in that sense for the victims of domestic violence. They face greater aggression, and they have even less of a opportunity to escape that abuse that they are facing in the home environment. So certainly this problem has escalated to a great degree. We know the WHO has put out a statement saying they have reports regarding 60% increase in the number of emergency calls that are initiated by women. And we also have an emergency call system in the Bangalore City Police, Dial 100. That also sees a great rise in such, reported cases of abuse in the home environment. Similarly, would be the experience with the national helpline that is there for women, 181. So it's undeniable that the problem has escalated to a great degree, and intervention is very much required. So the first important thing that I can inform to people who are in the situation is that they must reach out for help. There are certain numbers that are available to them, which they can get the help that they need. On the national scale, there is the emergency response system that is there. It's a common number, 112, that is operational. So that operates for emergency as well as medical and fire emergency. In Bangalore City, as everybody very well knows, there is dial 100. Any situation which you call, they are guaranteed a response within a very short time of 8 minutes.
I'm really sorry. Request everyone please put yourself on mute. It is really interrupting. Please put yourself in mute, because we have Nisha giving us some really critical information. She's giving our helpline numbers, and we cannot have our attendees miss out on this information. So sorry, Nisha. Please just.
So as I was saying, this dial 100 has a very good response time of around 8 minutes. You are guaranteed to have a vehicle with qualified personnel of the police department on the spot to attend to your problem within a short period of 8 minutes. Aside from that, if some people feel hesitant to approach the police, there are general helpline numbers like 181, as I mentioned. And even National Commission of Women has started a special WhatsApp number also, which I have shared with the organizers. If they can, circulate in the community, that information can also reach to a wider group of people. So first point of information for victim is that there is help out there. They just need to contact through these emergency response numbers. And second of all, you're of course organizing this seminar from the point of view of employers. So I would generally just categorize what response is expected out of people who may be aware of such a situation in their vicinity. That may be a neighbor, it may be a relative or a friend, or it may be a co-worker or boss. So usually the sort of psychology in Indian society is that that is some person's family issue in which we should typically not interfere. So this sort of coyness of raising the issue has to be done away with, because it is a very serious matter. It is a serious offense that is taking place. It is a bodily offense, and as per law, it is every citizen's duty to inform the police authorities regarding any breach of law. So as a duty of an ordinary citizen, it is our responsibility, not just on a humanitarian level, on a legal level, it is our responsibility that we inform the authorities that such situation is taking place. But I would like to also put in a word of caution that when one proceeds to do that, it's important that we also take the survivor into confidence, because there may be certain ramifications that the survivor would have to face once this information is received by the concerned authorities, be that the police or be that the Department of Women and Child Development, and that official sort of engagement starts with the situation that will have ramifications on the survivor. So it's important to take the survivor also into account. So as a preliminary sort of my comment, this is what I would like to state.
Excellent. This is most helpful, and I think it's very heartening to know that help is out there, and there are several helpline numbers that are available. I'm just going to take one step back and find out from Rama.
Veena,
Excellent, excellent. Good to have you. Yes, we can hear you. We can hear you. Rama, now I'm addressing the question to you again. What really is domestic violence? Like I said before, we've understood domestic violence to traditionally mean man hitting a woman, battering her up. Now, that is what we typically understand domestic violence to be. But and it's also in a very marriage context. So, in your view and legally speaking, what is the meaning of domestic violence, and at what stage can we reach out to the law enforcement? Oh, no. Again, you're off. You need to unmute yourself.
Okay.
Yeah, you're there.
All right.
Perfect.
I'm so sorry for that.
No problem.
So,
we're all learning.
yeah, getting into the new normal. Well, the domestic violence is all pervasive. It's pervasive in all strata of society, be it the rich, poor, and all in all areas of society you find domestic violence. And as per law, domestic violence can either be a threat, abuse, physical, which includes physical, economic, psychological, emotional, sexual, or verbal. So all these can come under domestic violence as per Domestic Violence Act, as promulgated under the Protection of Women under Domestic Violence Act 2005. So physical abuse, we are very aware of physical abuse, and we have been associating domestic violence only with physical abuse earlier. So physical abuse like conduct of causing bodily injury, shoving, slapping, kicking, all that. But then there is the the invisible abuse of the psychological and the mental abuse, which is not seen. So even when you go to the court, you cannot show, unless you have taken help, you cannot show the court that you have suffered all this psychological abuse. So sexual is also part of domestic violence. Sexual abuse can be forcing, it could be forced sexual intercourse, or forcing the woman to watch pornography or do certain things which are not considered normal. And then the economic abuse. Economic abuse is when she is not allowed access to finances, or her finances are appropriated in a way where she is excluded from it. So these are part of domestic violence and not just physical abuse, as is generally understood. So your question with regard to whether domestic violence can be only between married partners, well, the legislation, for the first time, it recognizes the abuse faced by a woman in a live-in relationship. So the domestic violence by a partner with whom she has lived in, but the definition says that she should have lived in the nature of marriage. So she should have lived with him for considerable time or for a period of time for any violence perpetrated by him to fall under domestic violence, and for her to seek the court, relief from the court. So that is one. And the other people who can also approach the court for domestic violence are for relief under domestic violence, mothers against son, or brothers and sisters against brothers, stepdaughter or stepmother, or adopted daughter, or the adoptee mother. So these are people who can approach the court for relief under Domestic Violence Act.
Thanks, Rama. Nirmala, please feel free to ask your questions.
Yeah. So just following up on what Nisha was saying in terms of complaints and bodily harm, the police comes to you in 8 minutes flat, and I think that's phenomenal. Wonderful to hear that. I was just wondering, Nisha, if people reach out only if they are physically battered, because like what Rama was saying, abuse is a lot more than just the physical abuse. It's a lot more psychological, emotional abuse. Do people even know? Do women even know that they are help is available for them? Or do they reach out only when they are physically battered? How have you seen the cases?
I have one other aspect to this, saying, yes, we're talking about women, but do you also see cases where it's live-in partners, where men are getting abused, or when parents or children are getting abused? Because when I say domestic, I look at it as a home construct. And it need not necessarily be a husband-wife relationship. It could be parents abusing children, children abusing parents, grown-up children abusing their parents. It could be the wife abusing her husband. So what is it that you see in terms of you certainly are the only one with lived experience of these cases here. You're on mute, Nisha.
Sorry, I forgot what was the first question.
I
switched it on.
Yeah. Whether women reach out to you only when they are physically battered, or do they even know that psychological, emotional, other kinds of harassment is also something that they could get succor from?
As you are quite aware, there have been many surveys done where we find that women actually believe that it is the husband's right to physically assault them. They say that being slapped or whatever that may be the case, that's also perfectly acceptable in Indian society.
And
so physical abuse itself, I don't know whether a sign of love or whatever, but there is a high level of acceptance on the part of the victims as well of domestic violence, that it is an acceptable behavior on the part of the perpetrator. So when there is acceptance for actual physical assault, then you can imagine how much acceptance there will be for any other sorts of abuse that you are mentioning. And as far as the second question is concerned, abuse by men, in my personal experience, I have not come across any. There may be exceptional cases, but I don't think that it deserves as much discussion as it is being given. Secondly, elderly abuse, that is certainly very much a concern. Even during COVID, we have come across stories where elderly parents have been abandoned. They are not. We actually run an elders helpline out of Commissioner's office as well. So we also saw spikes in calls regarding the problems of elder citizens not having anybody to give them, like there are many that live alone by themselves. So that itself is a very, dicey situation in the context of a lockdown, which they're totally cut off from all sorts of support. They don't have anybody to get them groceries, to get them medicines, basic things like, gas cylinder and such things. So we found a lot of queries were regarding such things, where we try to reach out to them through volunteers and through the Department of Women and Child, which also caters to senior citizens. So elderly abuse is certainly a very big problem in our country and much neglected problem.
Thanks, Nisha. I'm moving to Dr. Lata, who is a clinical psychologist. So I just wanted to ask you a very specific question, ma'am, because we all, I think, are on board that domestic violence is not limited to physical abuse. It is all pervasive. There are several angles to it. But one, what in your view is domestic violence? Second, why does it happen? And why do people decide to tolerate and live in abusive relationships? There is definitely a psychological angle to this.
Yes. Thank you, Veena, for giving me this opportunity. I think, from the psychological point of view, domestic violence, it means that there is abusive behavior, abusive in terms of physical, sexual, economic, verbal, and emotional. So all these aspects are included in this kind of abusive behavior. And often you find that the person who is the perpetrator wants to have a control, wants to intimidate the victim, the survivor. So this is a pattern, and it's a cyclical pattern. It doesn't happen once. It just keeps repeating itself. It keeps repeating itself. And why does the woman, if we are looking at women here more than children or elderly, if we can separate that out, because those are different issues. So if we can just look at women, why do women not seek help? Even in therapy, you will see that women will hide that part of it. Even if it is happening to them, they will not come up and talk to you about it. So this is the complex that women go through, because abuse, any kind of abuse, whether it's emotional or physical, it causes a sense of helplessness in the woman. And the gender inequalities and the patriarchal system that we live in, I think it encourages her to be quiet. It encourages her not to talk about, anything to do with her husband, because, husbands are considered like Lord and Master, therefore there's nothing wrong with them, and it's a shame to bring up anything against the husband. Therefore, even in therapy, it takes them a long time to open up and talk about it. And very often she doesn't even acknowledge it to herself. So I think that's the first step towards taking help, that she should acknowledge that I am being abused. Like someone said earlier that, I think Nisha said earlier that, they think that it's normal to be beaten or normal to go through this. So I think first thing is to acknowledge that they are being, abused, and then to talk to someone whom they can trust. So help is available, but will they seek that help? Will they access that help? That's the most important thing, I think, where women have to come out of this sense of shame and sense of guilt that they carry, which is what is stopping them from taking help. I don't know whether that answered your question.
That certainly did. And maybe it would help if when we say emotional, psychological, financial, yes, these are words, but maybe for our audience, and either as part of this question or as part of subsequent questions, all of you, if you could give us some examples, it would be really helpful, because it would give us all some perspective of what is really emotional abuse. Is it manipulation? Is it gaslighting? There are multiple words that are doing the rounds, but give us an example if you could.
Yeah. So there was this professor of, in fact, one of the colleges, and she is an independent woman. She is earning for herself, has a family of 3 children, and husband was a businessman. So he also had a habit of alcohol abuse, and to the outside world, it looked like a ideal family which went on. But because this person, I mean, this lady would hide the fact that the her husband was constantly trying to control her in every way and putting her down in spite of her achievements. You know, being a professor in a college, she was always put down that she's not a good mother, she's not a good wife, she doesn't know how to cook, she is not good looking, she's not attractive. So all these were hurled at her, which is what is emotional abuse. And she would become very helpless and start feeling guilty that maybe I'm not doing something right, I'm at fault, so she looked at herself as a failure, which was really uncalled for, because the children were with her. In spite of that, the children also could not raise their voices and tell them, because woman would keep quiet, the lady would keep quiet, and therefore the children also did not feel empowered enough to question the husband about it, father about it. So this went on, and then she went into depression, and that's how she came to me for the treatment of depression. And then I was able to dig this history out of her, and her whole depression was because she felt like a failure when the husband would keep on saying that. She internalized all the labels that he gave her, and started feeling depressed. Okay, she had to be medicated, yeah, and given
And
therapy.
thank you very much for this, Lata. I'm just moving on to Dr. Pushpa. Dr. Pushpa, could you just give me a quick introduction of yourself? Because I am not really sure. I understand you're from the government. And after that, I would like you to just give us a quick brief on what is the support system that the government has put in place for one, to encourage individuals of domestic violence to come out there and make their complaint. Because today, if I want to leave home, I want to know where is it that I can go, who to call. Are there support homes? Are there shelter homes? Is there somebody who is going to give me the basics in terms of a roof to stay under, some food to eat, a clean living space? What is available to a victim or a survivor of domestic violence? You're on mute, ma'am. You're on mute. BCIC team, if you have controls, could you unmute them, please? Okay, they're off. Okay, I'm going to then go back to, I'm going to go to Augie, who comes from the corporate world, and we're all talking about the new normal being one where most of us work from home, and therefore for an employer, is it now even more important to ensure that the new workspace, which is home, is free from harassment, free from domestic violence? Is it also blurring the lines between personal and professional, like what Nisha mentioned earlier in the conversation? We all think that this is a personal matter, and a lot of us should not be interfering in that. But as employer organizations, why is it important, and what can be done?
Meena, thank you so much for that question. So before I go on to answer it, I'm truly delighted to be here, among some very noted panelists as well as participants. If you can give me 2 minutes, I need to say something about our Women's Employment and Leadership Committee in BCIC. Okay, so for all of you who are here and didn't know, Bangalore Chamber of Industry and Commerce has established the Women's Leadership and Empowerment Committee. And what we do basically here is to traverse some of these topics like we are talking about today, which are very sensitive and at the same time not attempted. So we are a body which helps bring such topics out to create greater awareness, to support the industry as well as the society we live in. And then, of course, our main objective is to further the cause of women in workplace, and we do this through training, development, and various other interventions. So it's not just about career, it's about entire well-being, okay, be it financial well-being, emotional well-being, financial security, and so on and so forth, and training and equipping them for the future, all right? We also support the government in terms of public policy initiatives, and we serve as a consulting and advisory body to our 700 plus members. So if you're wondering why me, a male, is out here co-chairing a women's empowerment and leadership body, I think that was deliberate and not by default. It was by design, so that unless you have greater male allies, we cannot further the cause of women in leadership and provide them true empowerment. So that's the reason why I'm here. Okay. Now going to the questions. Okay. That Veena, you have brought up. So today, working from home, we went through what I would call an abnormal after the lockdown, and finally settling into a new normal. Okay, so what is this new normal? I saw some pictures, where people who were working from home sent across, and these pictures, one is they warmed my heart because people were so committed to the work they were doing. So there was this picture of somebody, probably it's a small home, out a floor on the mat, a mat on the floor, and somebody working from there. And here's the other picture that I saw of a single bedroom or a studio where these young people are working on the bed. Okay. Now, workplaces have changed to homes. Okay. And all our homes are not working enabled. They were designed for us to live. As a courtesy to the participants, can someone go on mute? Whoever is not speaking, please. Okay, thank you. Yeah, so they're made for living, okay, not working. So working from home, first of all, is a transition. It's a journey, okay? You just don't come and plug in and play. Yes, you can do it for 1 or 2 days, but if you're going to do this as a regular feature, as you wake up every morning, then there are various things that we have to look at. Okay, and I'm going to also say that there are multi-generations at home. You have the grandparents, you have the parents, you have the kids. Okay, and we're all fighting for something. It's either the best couch or the Wi-Fi bandwidth, who has to be closer to the modem, with kids also downloading, either playing games or movies or even learning online. And then there is, a lack of space, lack of movement because it's a lockdown. Elderly people have to move. And this also creates some kind of an emotional conflict in the home. Okay. So we have to equip the people, not just the women out there, but the entire family in terms of what are those things that are required for us to work out of home. Okay, so I'm not going to go more deep into that. Then comes, the resources. Well, like I said, Wi-Fi, furniture. Do I have to have the right chair with an ergonomic design? I think the answer to that is yes, because all these are factors that drive people to do something like domestic violence. Now, if somebody is sitting in a chair that is uncomfortable for a long time, there is room to be irritable, and moods can change and swing and result in various other things. Okay. Now, in terms of employers, what can employers do? Employers can provide the right environment for them at home. Okay. It starts by equipping themselves with the right stuff, be it computers, be it technology, be it whatever. Okay. Then it's about training the person, the employee, as well as the others within the family in terms of what it means to work from home. What are the tolerance mechanisms that you need to have? Okay. And also it's involving the rest of the family. Okay. You have kids also running. So sometimes they're so curious, they want to know what you're doing. Doesn't matter if you bring the kid over and let him see who all you are talking to on the video conference. Okay. So involvement is so important, as again saying, shutting the door off on somebody and saying, hey, I need this space. You definitely need this space, but there's a way of doing it and to be truly inclusive at home. Okay. Then comes the other things, in terms of the blurring of lines. Where does work stop and where does home begin? To be honest with you, I'm also battling with the same thing, all right, just like all of us. So I don't have a clear answer, but I would say that it all comes down to personal discipline in terms of where I want to stop, okay, my work and where I want to start the personal life. So like I said, this is a journey. So we are getting work and personal life mixed up. You know, we are talking here and then we put things on mute and go off video. I want to make a cup of coffee, or I want to do a bio break and things like that, or there is a doorbell ringing. I need to go down and get groceries. Now, all these things are realities, okay? So we don't have these kind of disturbances while we may be in a workplace, but it's how we cope and how we have a self-discipline. Lastly, employers, you know, do they dismiss this as, you know, it's a personal thing? I think by and large, if you take a legal perspective, we would say, hey, Miss XYZ or Mr. XYZ, sorry, this is your personal thing. You will have to deal with it. Yes, it is personal. But I think we have a responsibility to train and develop them to understand what constitutes domestic violence, what are the grievances, the redressal mechanisms that are available, how you can avoid it, how you can have somebody as an ally, the neighbor or the milk vendor or whoever it is. And we all know the sign, right? So while you are on a call and and you're locked in with the abuser, there is a way you can even tell the outside world, you know, by certain cues. So one of the cues that is globally acceptable is you leave this palm out and then bring your thumb in and then you close. That means to say that I'm under abuse. Okay, so these are the things that we can do straight away, and then state the consequences. Some to the abusers. State the consequences very clearly that any form of abuse will result in this consequence. All right. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Augie. And I think I really think it's important to invite Nirmala to give her inputs on this as well. From what I understand, Nimi has already advised several organizations on how they can build policy to kickstart the conversation around domestic violence.
Okay, thanks, Veena. Yeah, today it's a slightly different situation in terms of workplaces being homes. But you know, even when it wasn't the situation, workplaces were impacted because of domestic violence, right? Like I said earlier, the consequences of it follow into the workplace, spills over into the kind of work they do, the kind of coming late. Sometimes you even have the abuser showing up in the workplace. There have been instances where women have been forced to share their official mail ID passwords, you know, as a form of trust. If you trust me, share your official mail ID. And then they kind of get into the office mail and send out mails that kind of put this woman in a very tight spot. So, you know, these kinds of things have happened. And therefore, organizations said, look, this is something that we need to address, because not only does it impact the work, it's morally not the right thing to happen. And we have a responsibility. So like Augie said, I think educating men and women what abuse is, because I don't think too many people know this. You know, that abuse, a lot of things that they tend to tolerate and assume as normal is really not necessary, and that they could talk about it and bring that awareness into the workplace. And organizations are very powerful vehicles to do that, because when you have a captive audience that you're talking to, both men and women understand what abuse is, right? Because many times men also don't know that psychological abuse, is domestic violence, right? So I think that's very important. Having said that, organizations really can't invade the privacy of the home either. There is a line, a very thin line, but where organizations can take a stance is saying to employees and to everybody that we recognize this is an issue and we are open should you need help. And the way organizations have supported this is in multiple ways. Sometimes they've given a designated number that you can call. Now, I know of a woman who was thrown out of her home at midnight. She had nowhere to go. She called up this number and they put her up in the company's guest house for the night till help arrived for her the following day, right? So that's something the company can do. The company can identify organizations that can help her. It's not forcing the woman to come and talk about it, but allowing that this conversation is okay to happen. Let me share yet another example. This was a very, very senior woman, and this is important to note because this happens across the board, and a very senior leader who's seen as a role model in the rest of the organization was struggling with abuse at home. And there was a point when she put in her papers. She came to the organization and said, I'm quitting because I can't take this. I need to deal with the troubles at home. And she put in her papers. And then her manager sat her down to ask her, what exactly is the problem? Why are you doing this? Your career is going places. Why would you do this? And that's when she opened up and told him this in confidence. And that changed a whole lot of things for her, because he kind of stepped in to support her, saying, look, now is when you need your job more than ever. And I can see you through the next few months. And with his help, she stayed on the job. And to date, she's so obligated to him, saying, you know, he helped me through one of my toughest points in my life, right? So these are things that can happen. Organizations are open to the idea and say that, you know, this is possible. They can change schedules. Like I said, sometimes people walk into the office asking to meet the wife or the, you know, the wife primarily. And then the organization says, okay, she's not working here. They change mail IDs in certain cases. So these are things that are very much in the organization's control if the woman comes up and asks for help. So therefore, creating an environment where the woman feels comfortable to walk up to the organization is an important thing to do.
Understood. Thank you for this, Nimi. Now I'd like to move on to Dr. Pushpa. Pushpa, could you please unmute yourself?
Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah. Thank you so much. I'm going to just very quickly repeat my previous question. One is, please introduce yourself very quickly when you start, and then tell us what is available. This entire conversation loses significance if we do not know what is available to us, if we have to make that SOS call to say I am being abused. So what if I have to leave the house today, what is available in terms of government infrastructure for people who are being abused?
Yeah, good afternoon, ma'am. The government of Karnataka has appointed protection officers. They are the block level, we have protection officers, and at the district level also deputy directors are in charge of that protection duty of a woman. Then we have exclusive protection officers. There are 47 protection officers are appointed by government of Karnataka. So they are all at the taluka level and district level. They are helping the women who comes in need of help, assistance, and other violence affected women. They approach the protection officers. The protection officers are helping them to prepare a DIR and then ensure aggrieved woman is provided legal aid, and they also ensure medical services, then safe shelter, information on service providers is also provided to the women. Then they are also ensuring orders for monetary relief and compiled with other help also. So women who need protection and shelter, we have Swadhar homes to give them shelter, and then also protection to the women is being given in the Swadhar homes.
How many of these are there, ma'am? Because these are, is this available in rural areas, in urban areas?
Yeah, we have urban and rural area. We have 57 Swadhargraha homes are functioning.
And how many people can one home accommodate, or all of these homes together accommodate?
30 women in one Swadhargraha. We can accommodate.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Understood. And as part of, and how does one have access to this? I just call a helpline, is it?
Yes, 181 helpline is also there. They can access that helpline.
Okay, understood. Understood. What about, so we have a question very specific on this about one-stop crisis centers that are set up under the Nirbhaya Fund. Do they have any role in this, and what is this one-stop crisis fund really doing to rescue and rehabilitating individuals of domestic violence?
Yeah. We have 30, with the help of Government of India, as you said, in Nirbhaya Fund, we have started functioning 30 OSC centers, that is one-stop centers. That Sakhi one-stop centers are functioning. So we have four completed buildings are available. So the rest of them are under construction. Meantime, we have started our OSC centers in government hospitals, where we have administrator, then social workers, counselors are there, legal advisor, police assistants, medical help. We are ensuring that.
how does it work, though, ma'am? I just want to break this down for our audience a little bit more clearly. So today, assuming I'm a victim of domestic violence and I'm reaching out for help, like Nisha mentioned, there is a police helpline number that I can reach out to. But what I also have access to these protection officers and the homes that you set up. But how do I go about with it? Is there a channel? How long will it take for me to have access to one of these homes? Is it immediate? Can I just go there and say I need to check in today? How does it work?
That 181 helpline that is connected to, that works 24/7.
Okay.
As soon as they receive the call, they will just forward the call to the concerned police authority, then CDPOs or Santvana centers we have. Then immediately we'll take care of that woman and we'll rescue her, and then we'll help her out. What help she wants, we'll help her out.
Understood. And this is mostly about physical domestic violence, right?
No.
Any type
of violence, ma.
Any type of violence. Excellent. That's very, very good to know, actually, that even as the government machinery is looking to protect emotional, physical, economic violence as well. I'm coming back to you, Nisha. When it comes to making a complaint, what is it that you would recommend to? We have a bunch of panelists here, audience here. We have this webinar is going to be recorded and put out there. So I would really like your inputs on what is it that a person should prepare for before making that complaint. Because domestic violence may be a one-time incident. Sometimes we bear with it and we wait for a few days to make that complaint. So what is it in terms of collecting evidence, in terms of just being more prepared to make that complaint? What are your recommendations to people who are victims of abuse?
Very simply, I don't think we should overload survivors of domestic violence. There needs to be no preparation at all. They can go tell what has happened to them at the police station. If they are capable of writing down their complaint, they can write down their complaint. Otherwise, the station house officer will record the statement as heard by him, and it will be shown to the complainant. Complainant can verify that it is correct, and based on that, they can sign the statement, or they can put a thumb impression for that statement. That is all that is required. They need not collect any evidence or any such thing. There is a collection of evidence is the responsibility of the police. The only thing I would advise is if they are suffering physical violence or sexual violence of any nature, once they have placed a complaint, it is advisable that they can get a medical done, so that there is a proper medical record of what injuries have been inflicted.
And this medical needs to be done, can be done from a private hospital, or does that have to be from a government recognized?
Any hospital.
Any hospital is fine. Any hospital is fine. Excellent. Now I'm going to move this to Rama, because you are a lawyer and you often help women put forth their in the law. What would be your recommendation there? Is there, like Nisha said, it's important not to overload a survivor of domestic violence, but is there anything that you would advise for individuals to be more cognizant of? Also, another request to all our panelists and participants, please put yourself on mute.
See, it's very difficult when a person is suffering domestic violence. First is for the person to understand and know that the person is suffering from domestic violence, is that domestic violence is being caused to the person. Especially I'm talking about the psychological or that kind of violence, where it is very difficult for the person themselves to understand that they are going through a particular violence. So the abuse can be physical. In case of physical, there will be some documentation. There could be doctor's reports, or there could be witness, or whatever. But otherwise, to be considered domestic violence, there has to be a pattern. One abuse cannot constitute domestic violence as under law. So there should be a pattern. So when there is a pattern and the person understands that there is a pattern and that the person is being subjected to domestic violence, it is always better to ensure that the person escapes from that and then seeks relief. So before that, what would be required is to gather as much information as possible. If there is going to be a scenario where the person will be thrown out of the house, it is better to keep all the documents, the certificates, or whatever may be required by the person handy. So maybe keep an emergency bag and keep some phone numbers to reach out to, as was mentioned a little while ago. It could be anyone, it could be neighbor, it could be your friend or anyone, or your employer. And also teach the children to reach out in case there are children, to reach out for help. So those things are important. And if someone else knows about what you're going through, that will also add on, because whatever happens within the four walls of your home, there may not be any evidence insofar as documentation or witnesses. So it is very difficult, which is why in the Domestic Violence Act, it says that in certain cases, the sole testimony of the aggrieved person is sufficient to,
Right.
I mean, there may not be any documentary or evidentiary proof for the person to establish domestic violence unless others know, or they have recorded phone conversations or video. If it is possible, I would advise my clients, when they are going through this, if they intend taking action or they are staying there, I would say record, but we try to be practical, because all of them cannot be practical in these situations. It may be necessary to just come out of the abusive relationship.
Understood. And it's also worrisome that when you say that domestic violence needs a pattern, a one-time incident would not really constitute domestic violence. So what would it be? It would be like, for example, if a spouse hits the other, it would be criminal assault. But to be domestic violence,
Yes.
there has to be more than one slap.
Yes, there has to be a pattern. There has to be a pattern of violence for it to be brought under the Domestic Violence Act. Just a one-time thing, yes, it can be.
Single instance of assault is also a criminal offense. So as far
It
as
is a
that
criminal
concerned,
offense. They can approach the police and all that. The other the reliefs are available. They can complain. But I'm talking about under the protection of women under the Domestic Violence Act. To be considered domestic violence, it has to be a pattern.
Wow. That's something that I think the legislature needs to relook at in terms of legal framework.
Can I just say a word there? Can I just say a word there?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
So with regard to the pattern that you were talking about, you see, the pattern exists when the abuser is a manipulative and intimidating and so on. But couples in general do have fights. I mean, there are so many who come for therapy, couples, and they do have fights. Sometimes it becomes physical, and each of them might, push each other or, hit each other or something like that. But always you find that they regret that action, because they know that they did it impulsively and it is a one-off action. So that's why it can't be considered, I think, legally punishable or something that is a pattern. So when the perpetrator is constantly manipulating or trying to intimidate the person, the partner, then it becomes more of a abusive nature. How it impacts the victim is also something one needs to take care of. So in a couple who are both a little aggressive in nature and they tend to fight with each other, it's happened even in my own clinic. Sometimes they get into a heated argument and they go on with fists. That does happen, but they both are regretful. They're willing to look at themselves and try to change it. So it's not a pattern. So I think that difference needs to be made. Otherwise, everyone could be called an abuser.
Honestly, the lines here are very, sorry, let me just once again, I think the lines here are really, really blurring, and we've seen this often, that abusive people have regret as well. They come back and say really sorry, and then let me go ahead.
Continues.
That's exactly what I was going to say, that, there is that cycle that happens, so somebody, the man batters the woman, and then he apologizes and says, we have a good thing going, let's not destroy it because of this one instance, let's get back together. And she agrees and everything seems okay. And then it repeats itself several times before she realizes it's a pattern, and, so that's exactly what I was going to say, that it takes women a little time to understand this. So the first time it happens, they need to know that their antennas should be high on this, because it's very likely to repeat.
Though abuse should be accepted.
Yeah, I agree with you on that entirely. But I think it's simpler. So just to repeat what Rama said, she said no abuse should be accepted. Again, a request, earnest request to all our participants and panelists to put yourself on mute when you're not speaking. No abuse should be accepted, but there's so much more to a domestic situation, such as financial independence. If the person does not know where to go or what to make out of his or her life, then that slap might not seem very significant in the larger scheme of things. So it is important for each person to come to terms with how much they can accept, and until when they can accept. And it's so important to also be aware of what is the recourse that they have available, so that they can be a lot more confident in making these complaints. Dr. Pushpa, we have a question from our attendee.
Veena, can I interrupt, Veena? Miss Nisha James wants to join for another meeting, so she wants to log out. You can just thank her.
Sure. Thank you so much, Nisha, for being part of this conversation. And if you have any last words for our attendees, please do let us know.
No, the last word said was no abuse is acceptable. That's, I think, the perfect thing to end on. So,
okay. I would thank you. Thanks, Nisha. Thanks very much for your time. It's an honor to have you here. Bye. Dr. Pushpa, we have a question from our attendee here on what is we spoke about shelter homes, we spoke about support being available for women, but what is available for people who are not women? It could be men, it could be transgender individuals, people who don't identify as women. What is the support that the government has for these people?
Madam, they can approach all these type of women can approach to our OAC, one-stop center. Hello, one-stop center. They will provide a service for these type of person also. Third gender.
Yeah, but we're talking about men as well. We're talking about what happens if a man is abused by
they can approach our family counseling centers run by a social welfare board. There are 38 family counseling centers. One of the family counseling center is in the Parihar, that is in the police commissioner office. They can approach the family counseling center as well as mainly family counseling center.
Okay, understood. Thank you. I'm coming back to you, Lata. Well, it's important. There's a huge psychological impact to abuse, and there are several stages of this, where one is acceptance, then there is shame, then you go through a whole trajectory of emotions. But it's really important for people out there who are survivors of violence to understand what is the support available. Yes, we understand from Dr. Pushpa and Nisha in terms of what is it that the government has to provide, but in the private space, I'm sure there's a lot of support that is available. If you could just share some light on that, please. You're on mute, Dr. Lata.
So one is that we have a lot of clinical psychologists and therapists in practice. There's a long list of them. I think they're listed. I mean, if you Google, you will get a long list. Apart from that, I think there are these women's organizations like Vimochana and Shakti who work for women, and they definitely entertain these kind of complaints. And sometimes I liaison with them to help many clients, so that, like you said, in the middle of the night when they have to just leave the home, or when they need that kind of crisis intervention, then these women's organizations also come to help. So those are available. But I think the first step to be taken by the victim, you know, that she acknowledges that this has happened to me and I need to take care of myself. That itself is a big step. I think once that is done, which the therapist has to help, and once that is done, I think she can move forward.
Thanks. Thanks, Sheetal. I think we have an attendee who has been very brave to put out her personal situation. And she's rightly pointed out that domestic violence has a huge impact on careers and on the ability of a person to function normally. To quote, she said, harassment and mental and physical stress makes it difficult to work and they lose their jobs. But the courts say they're capable of working and why did and question the requirement for maintenance. So Rama, I would really urge you to look at the thread that one of our attendees put up there, and hers is a situation where she seems to be a qualified lawyer and who has been a victim of domestic violence, but is suffering in the hands of.
Hello. Yeah.
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 Go
Veena,
ahead.
I'm just trying to check what it is that she said. Okay.
I'll give you
So far as cases, so far as the cases of domestic violence in courts, the courts right now need to be more sensitive and a little quicker in all the cases that are filed before the court, because this is a special statute. And what the court normally does is they just, as routine, with many courts do not even pass the bare protection orders, which are very much essential as under the Act to protect the women from any domestic violence. So what they do is they just, as routine, pass an order of notice to the other side. So when it comes to financial stability of a woman who is undergoing domestic violence, the court needs to be a little more sensitive. And what we have seen is some courts they rise up to the occasion and some don't. So that is what the actual scenario is. Though the statute is there, which says that any financial support that is given to the aggrieved person should be in consonance with the standard of living that is enjoyed by the person, that doesn't always happen. So that is one failing that I see of the courts rising up to the occasion of passing.
And what she's, I think, quite rightly pointed out is that different avenues, be it the police, be it courts, be it workplaces, a lot of us do have this adjustment mentality where we tell the victim of domestic violence to just adjust and see if they can manage within the four walls of the marriage. So my question here is to both Mimi and Augie: can employers play any role in this to help to create a more confident and sustainable mindset where employees are aware of what their rights and responsibilities are, not just from an abuse perspective, but from an abuser's perspective as well, and it could help extend to even things like reaching out to the police station. The negotiating power of an organization is sometimes far more intense than the ability of a survivor of domestic violence to put forth her claims. So how far can an organization really go in all of these things?
In Karnataka, there are 116 service provider NGO.
Okay.
They will come forward to help these type of women.
Okay.
They can file a DIR on the part of the aggrieved person directly to the court without the help of our protection officer and all those.
Understood. Thank you so much. My question here is to Augie and Nirmala in terms of organization interventions here.
Nimi, you want to go?
Yeah, thanks, Veena. I think I sort of touched on this in my earlier response as well. There is a lot that employers can do. I mean, the Sexual Harassment Act, for example, a lot of employers take care of a lot of things, and I think it's beginning to make a difference in everybody understanding what sexual harassment is. In the same way, I think we also domestic violences, because again, like we all agree that people understand it to be physical. The people that are going through it are often putting up with it, both women and men and LGBTQ people, etc., etc. All of them need to know what abuse really means. It's about being belittled, humiliated in front of others. It could be, it could be a wife threatening a man saying, I'm going to complain to your employer about your bad behavior, for example. It's men being abused as well. Many times they don't understand these things. And when organizations speak, employees listen. And this is a great way of spreading that awareness, which then kind of brings, a lot more self-monitoring behaviors, I would imagine, into the workplace, more consciousness and mindfulness. In addition to this, there are very practical things that employers can do. Employers can provide a safe space about where they could come and talk about this. They could even provide, and I think it was Pushpa, who sort of brought this piece in about where do they keep important documents. There are organizations that give you a locker, where once you tell them that you are going through these challenges, these are very, very simple, easy to do things for organizations to be able to provide a guest house if there is a need. These are things that can be provided on the spot as support. And giving them a safe space to talk about it is the first thing. And they will talk only when they believe that the employer is not being curious, inquisitive, but is really out there to support them. So giving that confidence, just like how sexual harassment, and I'm really connecting the two because we work a lot in that space. This is not about sexual desire that causes sexual harassment. In the same way that domestic violence is not caused by anything else, but the need to control, right? So this is, power playing its part. And if we can help people understand this and recognize it early, we can prevent a lot of cases from happening.
So if I may add to that as to what the corporates could do, this is all the companies normally have the POSH committees in place. So what could be done is that the POSH committees could be trained to address domestic violence problems of the employees. So that way, there is already a system in place which can take care of the domestic violence issues as well, and also help in a personalized safety plan for the employees. So in case employee complains of, say, physical threat, and more so during the lockdown when the abuser and the victim are within confined spaces, so they can make some kind of safety plan as to ensuring that they don't go into the kitchen when the abuser can come in and then have easy access to knives or whatever and cause violence. So these sort of engagement with employees might help in corporates to ensure that at least physical and other violence comes down. These 2 points I just wanted to add.
Thank you.
I would just say though that the POSH committee may not always be equipped for something like this. It's a little bit more specialized and would need a counselor, I would think, to be able to deal with these kinds of issues. So many companies have what are called EHS.
Of course, the POSH committee will be the first step where you can have an interaction. They can be trained to handle this. And of course, a counselor is necessary.
Yeah.
Thanks. Thanks, Rama. Thanks, Nimi. Ogi, in one of our previous discussions, you've spoken about how technology can be used as a tool to ensure to tackle this issue of domestic violence. So if you could share your perspectives on that, please.
Sure. Thank you, Veena. So, yeah, I think in a highly technology-enabled world, we responded to a UN call, which was, and then we came with 5 design principles to combat a hidden form of domestic abuse. Okay, and this is about technology-facilitated coercive control. Okay, and these principles included various such things. I'm going to just very quickly share with you. Okay, so the background, of course, is that the domestic violence issues have gone up. After COVID-19 lockdown orders, 1 in 3 women worldwide have experienced intimate partner violence, according to WHO. And if you delve a little deeper into it, these were a lot of technology interventions also, where the abuser used technology, and therefore, how are these design principles going to help? Okay, so one is promote diversity, so designers can consider all potential users of technology and not just the assumed use. This means shedding the idea that technology can only be used for good. There is good tech and there is bad tech. Okay, then guarantee privacy and choice. Okay, so users can ensure that data that is being shared, they are informed about it and they have the right privacy settings. And then combating gaslighting with tools to ensure that there is a digital record of evidence and abusers can't manipulate victims into doubting memories. Okay, then strengthen security and data so that users can have joint control and collect and share only necessary information. And then technology, using cognitive technology to be more intuitive so that victims can easily navigate the products. Now, for example of technologies that abusers use is that connected devices, connected doorbells to keep the victim in and notify an abuser that an attempt is being made to leave. Okay, credit card apps can also monitor spending of a victim or control issue and combating fraud. Okay, now in the future, there's going to be 125 billion internet connected devices by 2030. Okay, and these devices could become more prevalent, where abusers will have more control to manipulate their victims. Therefore, critical to safeguard new technology with strong anti-abuse protections so that abusers don't use these tools to harm their victims. And finally, most importantly, is that if we are also adding other things, like promoting diversity, guaranteeing privacy and choice, combating gaslighting, strengthening security and data, making technology more inclusive, we could bring in this good tech and enable safety and security, not just for the women, but everybody within that ecosystem. Thank you.
Thanks, Oki. I think it's really important. It's high time we start integrating technology for, like you said, make good tech really meaningful. And now, I think this entire conversation also needs to touch upon what I call bystander accountability. And this is important in the POSH space, in the discrimination and harassment space, and therefore in the domestic violence space as well. So when I say bystander accountability, it's about what you and I can really do when something is happening. So if any of you have thoughts to share on bystander accountability, you're most welcome to share it here. Rama, Ogi, Mimi.
Okay, yeah, so I think I'll take this because we talk about this in the sexual harassment space. Yes. Now, there really is an important role that the bystander plays because, it has an impact on everybody that's around when something like this happens. People notice it, but they kind of pretend they haven't, or they make light of it and say, okay, it doesn't bother me. The person who, was impacted is not saying anything about it, so why should I intervene? These are ways in which you justify not taking action. So it's important that you kind of tell people that this is important for you to notice and to bring to attention. Now, again, like I think Nisha James had pointed out, we cannot take it up on their behalf. You need to have their consent that it needs to be brought up, which then means that you need to have a conversation with them. So if you have seen something that was not okay, it's quite all right for you to catch that person separately and say, I saw this. I was wondering if you were comfortable with it. Would you like to talk? Yeah, so this is one way of letting the person know that you noticed and you are there to help if required. And then it's up to that person to want to take it up. Really, it's beyond that, I think it would be very hard for you to force somebody to raise a complaint when they don't want to, but the bystander support needs to be that. And I think in a lot of things that we were talking about today, awareness is terribly important, even for the bystanders to intervene. So building awareness is very important. And I think that, the government of India had started this Bell Bajao campaign against harassment some years ago. They were very effective, right? I think everybody was talking about it, and all it said was just go and disturb what's going on, intervene, just ring the bell. If you hear your neighbors fighting, just ring the bell. It's very likely to come down. And I think we need to have some very creative means of letting people know that it's okay for them to intervene and to what extent they can intervene. So I think the bystander responsibility is important, but that comes in only when they know it's abuse, right? Otherwise, so helping people to even understand, just like we've done in corporates to help explain sexual harassment, we need to do the same for this as well. Yeah, absolutely. Then we kind of complete the picture.
Can I say something there?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yes, Rama, sure.
Insofar as the Domestic Violence Act is concerned, it says that an application under the Domestic Violence Act can be filed by the person or a person on behalf of the aggrieved person. So a person who sees that there is a violence, but again, as Nirmala mentioned some time back, against their wishes we cannot file. So they have to be all right. They have to first understand that they are being abused, and they should be okay with somebody else taking action on their behalf to ensure that they are relieved of the domestic violence. So the bystander, as per law, it is possible for the bystander to help, but again, it is necessary for the person, the aggrieved person, to accept that.
Absolutely.
So can I say something there? Yeah.
Yes. And before you start, I think there's a huge psychological, I was anyway going to come to you and ask you a question on this. There's a huge psychological aspect to this as well. When we tend to not do wrong things when others are looking. So I think that's also where bystander accountability comes in from. So if somebody is doing something wrong and 5 people stop to watch, it's very likely that that act will cease. So what are your thoughts on this, Lata?
No, one thing I was going to say about the organization, how that can come in, the awareness in the organization, how can you increase it? So there are certain warning signals which can be, the employees can be educated on that. For example, the abuser will always socially isolate this person. So he will tell the victim that don't go to your mother's house because they are not good people. They are creating problems between us. Or don't talk to your friends. Those friends are too modern and too outgoing. You will not fit in there. So the person isolates, then he keeps checking, and then he keeps controlling all the actions of, so wherever you go, he is on the phone trying to track you and so on. So all these are warning signs. So how he manipulates, he uses different methods of manipulation. So if the employees are given this education about early warning signs and made aware that when you see those warning signs, you have to start looking at taking help for it. So I think that is one way of doing it. Yeah, your other question about how bystanders, like people, when they see people, probably it will stop. I think if one knows in the neighborhood, definitely one can try something like that, where 3 people can go and ring the bell. The ringing of bell, I think, was a great idea. I think we should try and repeat it. But other than that, I think workplace may not be possible because the person, it's such a personal issue that the victim will not feel like, just opening up with a group. So that may be a difficulty. So I think this is my opinion.
Coming out with something like domestic violence is undoubtedly not easy, but the conversation here, I'm going to request all of you to provide your concluding remarks on how can workplaces make this easier for people to talk about domestic violence and seek support from employers. And how can and this onus is somewhere on employers to open that door and create conversations. So I'm going to start with Augie on this.
I think the first thing, Veena, is to recognize that this is definitely a bane of society, and somewhere organizations need to put it up there as part of their corporate principles or values that harassment will not be tolerated. Okay, I think that's the first thing that needs to happen. Okay, and then of course is awareness. All right, awareness, set of guidelines. Just like when POSH was new, we went and put it up as a policy out there. So once you got it out there as a policy, supported by management, then there is a lot of seriousness in it. Then there is funding that flows in. Then people get recognized and rewarded for participating and making this a very important intervention. So I think these are the 3 or 4 things that needs to be done. And finally, of course, technology in terms of how we are going to use good tech. Like I told you, whether it's gaslighting or whether it's connected doorbells, enable people and give them certain tools saying that here is the red button for you to press. Okay, thanks.
Thanks. Lata, last final comments, please.
Yeah, I think we are talking about the workspace. I think there should be in-house counselors who can, provide that initial first aid, kind of thing for people with abuse. I think that's very important, which will empower the person who is going through abuse to go ahead and take that safety measures and help and legal help and so on. So the first step has to be through the counselor. So if there's an in-house counselor and then you educate your employees, just like you did for POSH, if you can educate the employees about what abuse, what does abuse mean, and how to recognize the warning signs.
Thank you. Rama, closing comments.
So I'd probably be repeating what Lata was saying. So access to support system will be very important, and to create that supportive workspace and awareness so that the person knows that the person is subjected to domestic violence, and also have that one person or one point where they can go and open up without worrying about privacy or confidentiality. And yes, of course, building awareness through training both the employees as well as a group of people who can be the points where they can reach out in case of any issue. And of course, the team can also, in case of domestic violence, they can prepare a personalized safety plan for each employee. So these are my
Thanks. Dr. Pushpa, anything from you in terms of closing comments, concluding remarks? You're on mute, ma'am. You're on mute.
From government side, we are approaching many of the garment industries and some of the organization through Women Commission in collaboration with the Legal Service Authority and the Women Commission, as well as the DWCD, are conducting many awareness programs regarding where they have to give a complaint, what are all the supportive services available to them. All those things we are conducting, madam. We have to improve these type of awareness program to reach out all the sectors of the organization.
Nimi, thank you.
Yeah, I think we've, pretty much covered a lot of things, but all I would say here is that, I was reading somewhere which said that you should never waste the opportunities that a good crisis provides. Now, the pandemic has certainly brought this topic to the top of the file, and we need to kind of not miss the opportunity. It's a very good segue for organizations to want to talk about it, because otherwise, it was very hard to bring in these topics into the organizational context. But something like this is presenting us a beautifully presented opportunity to start talking about it. And I think we should not waste that opportunity and make full use of it, because if we don't, the pandemic will move on, but abuse will continue to stay. So I think this is something that we just should not miss to do. And thanks very much for this opportunity. These are the first few public conversations on the topic, and I think we need to do several more of these for all of us to be on top of this.
I fully agree. It's wonderful to have a public conversation tying in an industry body, police, the government representatives. Dr. Pushpa is here. We have people from industries. We have a clinical psychologist, and this seems like one webinar that tied up all loose strings. And this is a great conversation starter. And like we said in the beginning itself, this is not intended to be a platform to provide solutions or a conclusion on this. This is the intention here to start the conversations on how organizations and employers in India and industry can get involved in containing this slow pandemic of domestic violence. Thanks everyone for your time. It's been a pleasure moderating this conversation. Thank you.
And thank you, Meena, for the great moderation. Thank you very much for pulling all of us together.
Thank you.
Enjoyed it.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.